Today I'm starting a series. Now, normally I don't like doing that, like part 1, part 2, part 3, etc. But for this one, we're building a castle, and to get the thought process over to you, and if you're going to start a castle alongside this series, then I really need the extra time to do it, and I really don't want to upload like one video of an hour long. Right, let's get straight into it. I've prepared a small island where I'm going to build my castle, and I'm just going to edit the terrain a little bit, which is completely normal. Now, if you're unable to edit your terrain, that's fine, but I do implore you to select your terrain carefully when you go looking around in your Minecraft world for somewhere to do it. I'm obviously working with something kind of flat, and I'm laying down the foundations and the plan. Now, this is going to be kind of complicated because it's going to look like a bunch of squares on the floor. But as I place them, let me just assure you that in a few seconds, I'm going to whack out the MS Paint and explain what's going on here. Planning is absolutely essential to making a full castle. You need to envision this stuff in your head. It's really, really important. But having said that, I'm just going to go into MS Paint and explain the thought process behind this. So, here I am on Paint with the plan that I've just made on the floor, and I'm going to explain what each part is so that you have context for the rest of the series. Okay, so these bits here, these highlighted bits here, are going to be towers. These are the three corners of our build, and they make up some of the most important parts. Now, as you can probably imagine, the bits that connect up these bits are going to be the walls. And being the only hole in the wall, you probably rightly thought that this is the entrance. It's actually fairly simple when you think about it all. So there's going to be a nice archway here, and that's where you're going to enter the castle. There's also a wall up here. And now this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. The giant stone square at the top right-hand corner is going to be the main castle bit and is going to present the biggest challenge when we make it. Now, I'm not saying that you have to follow this design. What I'm trying to explain is the thought process. You should, when you make your castle, evaluate the terrain and try to figure out what shape best fits your scenario. I obviously used something fairly flat so that I didn't have to worry too much about where I was going. Realistically, you're probably going to have a bit more terrain to deal with. So, coming up with a reliable shape that's going to be feasible for you to build on is very important. So, I'm just highlighting the fact that I've thought through what my building is going to look like. In fact, I've drawn a picture of it on my piece of paper here with a Sharpie, and I'll put a picture of it up there now so you can kind of see where I was going with this. So, yeah, anyway, this here is another wall. And in the inside, on the inside, we have these two bits here, which are going to be attached to the main building here, but are going to give it more shape. The problem with a castle is that most people do it incredibly, incredibly square. Castles are very square by definition, but we can help ourselves by adding these shapes. So when you come in, you're not presented with this giant stone block. Instead, you've got this nice little zigzag pattern. So on the inside, we have the stone where I've laid out, and this is going to be the inside of the wall so that the person can sort of walk along the wall if you want to. So that makes up that bit. And this bit here is simply just like another entrance, or this will like be another archway, so the person can walk in here and eventually enter the castle through there. It's just another design idea I had. You could have your entrance anywhere you like, really. So that leaves these wood bits here. You're probably wondering what they are. So, they are going to be houses. For the most part, anything that's cobble and stone is part of the castle. This here is more like a fort place. So there's going to be like a town square here, and just paths going round to the shop, to a house, to a shed, to a stable, whatever you want. I'm adding houses in here so it feels more like a fort town castle instead of just the stone lifeless thing itself. So I'm adding sort of the creative flair that would make this build really beautiful and not just this stone castle. And more importantly, the houses, although they're going to be white and brown, actually give a really nice contrast because the castle itself is going to be mainly grey. Anyway, let's get back into Minecraft and sort this out. Now you understand where we're going with this, we can begin building. And we're going to, in this first episode, build this bit here at the front, because this is going to define the style. So now I'm going to work on the first bit. Sorry that took so long to explain, but planning is really, really important when doing a big build because you could start and mess up and it can get really messy. Anyway, so I'm now going to work on this bit here, one corner, because then I can copy paste it to all the other sides. Now, having said that, hopefully you have access to WorldEdit because I do not envy you if you do not. So let me just stop here for a second and explain that this here is going to define the rest of the build. What I build right now is the style that I have to keep consistent for the rest of the build. Okay, so now I'm going to make sure that I am happy with it. I'm very, very, very much so just going with the flow. I have, in my mind, come up with this idea of a very, very grey fortress. So I'm obviously going to be using stone, cobblestone, and stone brick, but I will be adding more contrast colours later. So my main defining feature in my fortress is this frame that I have made out of stone, but every 2 blocks I've made an intermittent little ledge made of stone as well. And I'm going to detail it as I sort of see fit at the time. I'm sort of just making up a random pattern, nothing over the top. The main thing about this is that I have that stone frame with a stone brick backing. Anything I then do is just detail and isn't actually part of the finalized style. So, what I'm trying to get right here is the shape. It's very, very important. Now, I'm going to sort of freestyle this bit because, again, as I said earlier, this is going to define what it's going to look like overall. So I need to just make sure that I'm completely happy with it. I'm making sure that the height is nice and tall. A fort needs to be really, really tall. Otherwise, you're not going to get that sense of grandeur. I've seen so many people tweet pictures of me and say, hey, is this castle cool? Truth is, it's a little bit too short. Making sure that you have that sense of height is really, really important. So, if you're undergoing a project like this, I implore you to find your own style. I'm really trying to get across like how you should go about building a castle and the tips and tricks, if you like, rather than saying, hey guys, build this. Not what I'm after. So, for this I'm saying, find your style. This is a very important part. And I do recommend that you build towers similar to this in whatever way you want. Do a circular one if you want. So I'm just doing a completely square one and trying to keep a sort of rigidity of my build. So I'm going to replicate that round 4 times. Unfortunately, if you're doing this by hand, it's going to take you an awful lot longer. But you can see that I've got this very distinct style and detail to my build. And from this point on, it's very easy because I can take that one tower and copy paste it over into the other corners. Now I hope by now you've come up with your own idea and concept for your castle and haven't just completely copied me, although if you want to copy my ideas, that's also fine. Just, I do implore you to think through how the castle is going to be done. Right, so now we need to go and copy paste this to where we set out earlier where the towers are going to be. Having WorldEdit, as you can see, is a huge time saver. It would have taken me hours to replicate that tower over and over again. They're all symmetrical, they're all the same. WorldEdit can just make that so much easier. So they're actually on different y coordinates, but that's not a big deal because we can just approach that later. So you may have been wondering, why did I just spam cobblestone at the bottom? That's because I was aware of the fact that it was uneven terrain, and that cobblestone can just make it look like it's a foundation level, and I can just add cobblestone all around where that tower is missing some stuff, where it reaches the uneven terrain, and it actually works rather well. So, now that we've got our tower sorted, it's time to start on the wall. We're going to be approaching this in exactly the same way that we approach the towers, replicating the style, as you can see, with that very easy stone framework with a 2-block intermittent rudding system. And then afterwards, going to try and replicate as much as I can the same style. So just marking out and planning some shape, instead of having it completely flat, and I do implore you approach it in the same way, I instead decided to have just a bit jutting out so that it has a little bit more shape to it. Having large expanses of flat wall can be very difficult to detail, so by segmenting it up by adding an extra layer of depth, makes it look not only better, but makes it incredibly easy for you to detail later. So, you can see now that I've got the very basic of the style that I went for, the stone brick and the stone, and everything from this point on is just detailing. So hopefully if you have created a style which requires you only to do a couple of steps to get the shape right, then you can just detail it in any way you like. I'm going to do the same details I did before with the half slab and the cobblestone fence. Very simple stuff. And then behind it, I'm actually adding a clay, a green clay to be precise. You could add any sort of coloured clay you wanted. It just gives it that extra contrast, albeit very small. So you could actually take this a completely different way. I myself am doing the structure first, and then the detailing immediately after. You could do the entire structure of your castle, completely lay it out, and then detail the whole thing together. But I prefer to do it all at once so I can get that symmetry down and I can make sure everything is perfect. So now we're going to move on to the next bit, which is the entrance arch. If you remember back to when we were on MS Paint, this is the only entrance to the castle, so it needs to be kind of impressive. But it's very important when you're doing the archway to make sure that it's not too big. You don't want it to be overly complicated and so big that it's the only thing you see when you enter your castle. So I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing as I've done pretty much for the other parts of the build, the tower and the walls. I'm going to be doing that stone frame with that intermittent stone cladding all the way along and the stone brick base. But what's different about this one is I'm going to have to be doing the archway. But it's all very simple. I'm trying to get across here that once you've sort of set yourself a nice style, you can make anything happen, as long as you've got that vision in mind. So if you're going to be doing this, it's quite easy to do a nice archway. I'm actually going to be doing an overhang. So when you're doing an archway, you can just have it completely flat, but it's not going to look too good. So I've actually set out, as you can see, a little archway that's going to go over the top, and you'll see why that's going to look really nice in a minute. So I'm just making sure that all of the things add up and are in style with everything else. It actually ends up being quite a laborious task because you have to just keep repeating yourself, build after build after build, making the same thing. But at the end of the day, that's what a castle's all about. You've got to have this consistent stone brick all the time. So it's all very, very simple stuff, and hopefully you get that down fairly easily. You can see now that I've created a extra bit on top of the entrance. This is going to be its own unique size and shape, and it acts as either side of the archway, because the archway should, by the way, be above your entrance bit at the front, just so you have that extra essence of grandeur. So now I'm going to go and just detail all the rest of the stuff, because again, once you've got that shape down, it's fairly easy to do. So above the archway, I want to add these like little ruts and some cobblestone staircase and make it look like it's really being supported the bit above. And I've also left this sort of triangle or circular bit over the top because I'm going to want to put an emblem on my castle, because of course this is Fort Grian, and I'm sure you will want to label yours as well. So I'm going to be detailing it exactly the same as I have been for the rest of the build, and you will notice that it is completely grey. I'll address that in a second, right after I've copy-pasted it, and you can see the build is very much complete at the front here, but it really lacks that contrast with colour because it's just a big, detailed grey block. And very simply, without making it too bad, you can add lots of colour there just by simply adding leaves as vines, as I do with a lot of my builds, because again, this is like a medieval castle, they have vines growing everywhere. And again, you can add that emblem in the middle of your archway like I have. I'm going to do a nice G for Grian, and with the colour red in the background, Fort Grian is completely labelled, and then continue adding lots of leaves everywhere to give it that extra contrast. And you can see how well that's improved my build very, very simply. But, of course, we can put a flag as a symbol of our castle being used. I'm going to go for red, red being my shirt colour. You could go for whatever you want. So a couple of flags over the archway do not go amiss. Of course, I'm just going to copy-paste it, but for those of you that don't have the benefit of World Edit are going to have to do that by hand. I honestly feel so sorry for you. And of course I do mess up World Edit every now and again. So, there we have it, people. This is the first episode. That's all I have to show you for this one. I feel like breaking it up is going to be great in the long run because you're not going to want to get all of this at once. So, hopefully this is enough for you to get going with if you're going to undertake this. And I really hope that you now feel like you can tackle a castle because it is a huge project. I've already spent hours making it and I'm still not finished as I'm recording this. So I'm doing the first part now and hopefully we can get there. So now I'm going to do my outro.